After 17 matches played this season, Brighton and Hove Albion sit 17th in the Premier League table. They've been praised for their football under Graham Potter, but as things stand, they are yet to achieve a points tally that is reflective of their underlying statistics and attractive football. Before looking into the reasons why Brighton perceivably are underperforming this season, I just wanted to lay out an explanation of what is meant by expected goals. It's an important stat when assessing a team's performance over the course of a season, because expected goals totals against and for allow us to see the quality of chances created by a team and the quality of chances they give up to the opposition, as can be seen by this explanation from FBRef.com. XG, or expected goals, are the probability that a shot will result in a goal based on the characteristics of that shot and the events leading up to it. Now, these characteristics can include things like the location of the shooter, so the distance from goal or angle to the goal, the body part, if it was a header or off the left, right foot, their back, any part of their body, the type of pass preceding it, such as a through ball, cross or set piece, and the type of attack. Was it off of a dispossessing the opponent, possession, rebound, anything, or a parry off the goalkeeper? And to further explain this, my own interpretation of what XG sort of means in the context is that I would say it's a good measure of the quality of a shooting opportunity, both for and against, and as it is a probability, as we can see from the example below, for instance, there's a 76% probability of a penalty being scored based on its characteristics, and regardless of who's taking it, the XG of a penalty therefore is 0.76. And another important point to focus on is the fact that XG does not indicate or factor in the ability of the player taking the shot. So whether it's myself or Cristiano Ronaldo taking the penalty, the XG before the ball is struck is exactly the same, but we can look at post-shot expected goals later on, which then do factor in the quality of the shot after it has been taken. Now, looking at the table as of the 8th of January this year, as I've said, Brighton sits 17th, just 3 points above Fulham in 18th place. And by looking at the face value numbers here, you would say that Brighton are having a poor season, and at the minute don't look like a team that are going to pick up too many points for the rest of the year. However, if we look at the cumulative expected goals against figure, we can see that Brighton actually would sit 4th in the table in terms of chances given up to the opposition. So if all chances played out perfectly in terms of the probability that they went in, Brighton would have conceded the 4th lowest amount of goals in the league. The reality is, however, they have conceded the 5th most amount of goals in the league. And if we then look at their expected goals figure as well, they rank 8th highest in terms of goals that they should have scored. Again, if all the chances had played out perfectly, and based on the probability all of the goals had gone in. But the reality is they've actually scored the 8th lowest amount of goals overall. And if we look at the net expected goal difference that they've accumulated over the season, in terms of, again, if all chances had played out perfectly, their goal difference would be the 6th highest in the league. However, the reality is actually that they're down at the joint 6th lowest goal difference in the league, along with Crystal Palace. And if we look at the numbers this season compared to last season, despite the fact that currently they're 2 places below where they finished last year, their expected goal difference is actually 0.67 better, and shows that they are creating more chances than last season to score goals of better quality, and actually allowing the opposition less chances on goal than they were last year. And as we move forward, away from cumulative statistics, I just wanted to explain what is meant when non-penalty is applied to terms moving forward. Again, penalties aren't a consistently reliable source of goals for a large swathe of teams, and the ability to generate shots independent of penalties is far more indicative of a side's goal-scoring prowess. It's a fantastic explanation as to why we don't use penalties when looking at expected goals figures, really, when comparing the attacks of teams and looking at goals they should have scored. Again, based on the luck element of winning a penalty, it's not really a reliable source of goals through a season for a team. And alongside that, per 90 will be used again from this point onwards very often, because measuring stats over a 90-minute period makes them a lot more comparable than totals or by players or teams that have played more or less minutes than each other. It allows us to equate the difference between them and compare them a lot more thoroughly. So if we move forward and look at their non-penalty expected goals per 90, so this is in a typical 90-minute match, the expected goals that Brighton would be expected to create opportunities for and against. So if we look in terms of non-penalty expected goals for Brighton, they rank 11th highest, which means that they are creating the 11th highest quality of chances within a game. And again, if they'd all played out perfectly, would have scored the 11th most amount of non-penalty goals. And the really important thing to look at here is that Brighton's non-penalty expected goals against is actually the second lowest total in the league, which would imply that Brighton as a team defensively are giving up the second lowest quality of chances to opposition. So they would actually be expected to have conceded the second lowest amount of goals this season, which would imply that Graham Potter's system defensively is working well. But when we look at the actual numbers per 90 on the right hand side, Brighton have scored the 14th lowest amount of goals and conceded the 14th most. And these statistics show that they're not living up to their expected goals figures for or against. And I wanted to kind of highlight the reasons as to why this was, because I think it's extremely interesting given that people question the way Graham Potter sets his side out. Actually, the team itself works fairly well on a functional level. And it may be a question of personnel at both ends of the pitch, really, in terms of defending and the goalkeeper and the strikers, because they don't seem to be scoring the goals they should be based on their expected goals figures, and they seem to be allowing more goals than they should be based on their expected goals figures against. Again, this set of figures here show you the difference between their expected goals figures, non-penalty expected goals figures, and the actual non-penalty goals scored and conceded. So again, they're 0.24 per 90 below the goals they should have scored, and they are 0.37 over the goals that they've allowed this season. And that difference of 0.61 across a 38-game period, would actually give a 23 goal difference over the course of a season. It's about 9 goals scored that they look like they won't be scoring this season, and 14 goals extra that they will be. And actually, in terms of non-penalty goals from last year, these extra 9 goals would actually be a 26% increase on last year, which shows they're creating far more opportunities to score of great quality than last year. And actually, if we look at the goals against, they let in 52 non-penalty goals last year, and at the minute they're on track for between 44 and 45 goals against, which is a 13 to 14% decrease in goals conceded, which is seen as a great improvement. But if they actually lived up to their expected goals against figure per 90, as is non-penalty expected goals against, they'd actually see themselves conceding 30 or 31 goals if they stuck to it perfectly, that 0.8 that we saw before. And this would actually represent a 40% decrease from last year, so almost halving their total goals conceded if they could live up to the expected goals figures against. So looking into a deeper dive in this, I think one of the most important areas is their defence, because they're obviously neutralising opponents and reducing them to few opportunities to score of any great quality. But we need to have a look at why they're letting in so many goals. And the two numbers in the middle, or the two metrics in the middle, are a really good example of why their expected goals against total is so low, down at around 0.8, 0.81 on the left-hand side. They allow the third least amount of shots per game against them, and also the second lowest shots on target per game, which shows that defensively they really are reducing the opponents down to few opportunities and really limiting their opportunities to score. But the statistic on the right shows a great weakness somewhere in the defence, whether it's the goalkeeper or the defenders positionally, because for every shot on target, they are conceding more goals than anybody else. Despite the fact that they concede so few shots on target, it appears as though they're not actually being saved or being pressured on to be saved, because 0.41 goals per shot on target means that half of what is on target effectively is going in. And as I've sort of hinted to, there are two main reasons where this could be or could be for. And an underperforming goalkeeper against shot on target is probably the first one you think of, because you look at those shots on target numbers and think, well, it must be the goalkeeper causing this. But another reason, or an accompanying reason, could be that the outfielders just aren't affecting opposition shots. And what I mean by that is, obviously, a low XG chance, say from 30 yards out, such as the chance that Reece James took against Brighton, I think it was the first game of the season. He was about 30 yards out, ran onto the ball, but no Brighton players got near him, so his expected goals for that shot would have been relatively low. I think it was actually below 0.1, so less than a 10% chance that the goal went in. But no Brighton players were within 2 or 3 yards of him, which allowed him to get a low pressure shot off with extreme quality that flew into the top corner. And again, the sort of Reece James example is good because post-shot XG applies in this situation, and as explained here, the difference between post-shot XG and XG is that post-shot XG factors in the shot power and direction and the quality of the strike after it's been taken, to the point where the goalkeeper either saves it or it goes in. So Reece James's shot is a fantastic example because it was hit with power precisely at the goal and left Matt Ryan with no chance to save it. So if we look at the two goalkeepers that Brighton have used this season, they've used Matt Ryan for 11 games and Robert Sanchez, the 22-year-old, for 6 games. And the two metrics that I've picked out here, along with save percentage, are post-shot expected goals per shot on target, highlighted in purple, and post-shot expected goals minus goals allowed per 90. So if you look at the left-hand side of the table, Brighton have the lowest save percentage in the league across all goalkeepers, and generally people would pick out those stats and say, oh, they're a terrible goalkeeper. But again, in isolation, it would appear that way. But actually, if we look at, firstly, post-shot expected goals per shot on target, this statistic is really good in showing the difficulty of shots faced by goalkeepers. So, as we saw in the beginning, we've got expected goals, which is the probability of a shot going in before it's taken, and then post-shot expected goals, which factors in the power of the shot, the direction of it, how cleanly it was struck, and how difficult it therefore is for the goalkeeper to save. So Sanchez and Ryan's numbers being 0.39 and 0.37 actually imply that they've had the most difficult shots throughout the league to save. They rank first and second for difficulty of shots to save, which may go away into explaining why the save percentage is lower because, again, you would think logically that the harder a shot is to save, the more likely it would be to go in. So then to measure it as to if they are actually saving these shots at a good rate, we've then got post-shot expected goals minus goals allowed per 90. So as it says in blue, positive numbers suggest that a better luck or above average ability to stop shots, and across obviously more games, luck levels out and ability shows through. So let's say the two numbers there, the plus 1.2 and minus 3.2 for Sanchez and Ryan respectively, would imply that Sanchez is better on average at saving shots than Matt Ryan is, given that they face on average the same difficulty of shots. So based on these numbers, it would imply that Robert Sanchez is an upgrade on Matt Ryan thus far and may eventually go a long way in reducing the goals against, to therefore line up with the expected goals against that we've seen so far for Brighton. And if we're looking to fix Brighton's defensive problems, it does raise the question of should they look to buy a new goalkeeper or stick with one of the two that they've got. And when we compare the two goalkeepers, Sanchez seems to be outperforming Matt Ryan. Even if he's only played 6 games, I think those 6 games have showed that he's got a great ability to stop shots that he should be saving. And as I said previously, long term, I think he'll actually show good. Given that he's only 22 years of age, if you give him time to develop and become better as a shot stopper and his overall game, I think the dividends will pay greatly and actually bring Brighton's goals conceded total down every season. If we want to break it down further, I looked at the type of goals that Brighton have conceded this season and sort of split them up into a few categories just to illustrate the weak points of Brighton's defence so far this season. I've broken them down into penalties, set-piece crosses, so from a free kick or a corner, crosses from open play, cutbacks, which are sort of a low cross in themselves, own goals, wonder goals, which would only apply really to the Reece James goal scored when Chelsea played Brighton early in the season, and then open play other is just the remaining goals that wouldn't fall into these categories. So if we break them down, the majority of their goals, we can see 16 of the 22, or 73%, of their non-penalty goals have been conceded from wide passes or crosses, so they seem particularly weak when crosses or passes from wide areas come into the box. And then to look at further reasons why these are difficult to save, I've actually then broken those goals up into contested goals and uncontested. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see the two categories that I split up into. So defending players within 2 yards of the shooter would imply they are contested. And if there isn't a defending player within 2 yards of the player taking the shot, I would say that's an uncontested shot because they're not affecting the motion or the player taking the shot, which would then increase their post-shot expected goals, which is why we're seeing Brighton's goalkeepers face the toughest shots in the league and are therefore probably conceding more goals for that reason. So again, it brings me back to an earlier point I said, is it either the goalkeepers that are letting these goals in, or is the reason why they're letting so many in because the outfielders aren't doing their job defensively and putting opposition players under pressure when they're shooting? So again, I've highlighted earlier on, the Reece James goal is a perfect example of no one being near a player that looks like they're not going to score, but actually they give him the time and space to take a perfectly good shot on goal and actually hit it really well. As you can see here, You've got Reece James winding up from about 30-35 yards. The player highlighted next to him is Stephen Alzate, and the one behind is Aaron Connolly. And if you watch the clip of this goal, Aaron Connolly originally does see Reece James and starts sprinting towards him. But Stephen Alzate wanders across, and as he sees him coming across, Aaron Connolly stops tracking back. And as Alzate approaches the ball, he himself actually slows down as Reece James is taking the shot. And if he'd continued at the pace he'd approached him, he most likely would have blocked the shot or put Reece James off. As I say, you can see it here in motion. The ball gets played across Reece James. Here comes Alzate across. He looks like he's sprinting and he slows down at the last minute, and Reece James picks out the top corner perfectly. If we look at examples for Brighton conceding from wide areas, two really good examples of cutbacks that they conceded this season, both scored by James Rodriguez in Everton's 4-2 win against Brighton at Goodison Park. Rodriguez basically scores the same goal twice, and I've just broken it down into a few slides to show the problems that Brighton have on these two goals. Their back three, as you can see here, of Veltman on the right, Dunk in the middle, and Webster on the left, with Alzate and Lallana playing in centre midfield. Alzate and Lallana appear here to be recovering after losing the ball. You've got Webster running back into position as well, and currently he's got a fairly good view of the pitch. He can see Rodriguez to the left, and he can see the rest of his team through the middle, and you'd expect him to hold his position in this back three and cover the space in behind. But what we then see a few seconds later is Webster gets drawn towards the ball, as do 6 other Brighton players, which actually allows for a fairly easy cross for Alex Iwobi, because James Rodriguez then picks up the space Webster's vacated, and behind him, Solly March doesn't really spot this danger. He lazily jogs back, and actually the space between March and James doesn't really change throughout the clip. As we can then see in the third frame, Solly March hasn't really picked up any pace to recover. Rodriguez has got a free open shot on target, and it's very difficult for Matt Ryan to save at all. Adam Webster's out of position. His body's not correct to block the ball. And in terms of getting sucked into the ball, Webster does it again on the second goal, as we'll see later on. And just to play this clip through, ball's given away by Aaron Connolly in midfield. It's actually intercepted by James Rodriguez, and then Everton charge forward. And watch Solly March at the bottom, just jogging back as Webster's out of position. No one gets near Rodriguez, and he's got an easy tapping at the back post. And if their problems weren't bad enough in this game, they then basically conceded a mirror goal. So again, we're looking at Brighton's back three, slightly more stretched here because Veltman's drawn into where Doucouré is at the top of the screen. Yves Bissouma himself has just let Doucouré run across the front of him, which allows Iwobi's through ball. Adam Webster once again getting caught with a blindside run by James Rodriguez, and Solly March isn't even in the picture at this point. He's further up the pitch. And playing as effectively as a left wing back, he should be recovering and spotting the danger, but Adam Webster gets drawn into Calvert-Lewin and the ball here. And again, we'll move it forward a frame. This is the point where Doucouré's broken past Yves Bissouma through the Brighton back line, and he's either got Calvert-Lewin to pull back to or James Rodriguez now, neither of which are being picked up by Brighton players. So Alzate's let Calvert-Lewin go, Dunk's been drawn into the ball, Matt Ryan's drawn in, and Adam Webster's drawn into the ball. And this leaves James Rodriguez for another back post tap in, whilst 5 or 6 Brighton players are out of position on the wrong side of the goal. And we'll run it through here. The ball is lost by Alzate as well. He dives, no one near him ready to tackle, and then has to recover the ball. As we see, Doucouré driving with Iwobi, and Doucouré, if you watch him at the top there, just strolls past Bissouma in behind, and Rodriguez at the back post there. We can't even see March at this point. He's then got a free shot, and this is another great example of Brighton just not putting any pressure on the ball, either when it's crossed or when it's taken as a shot. Nobody spots James Rodriguez again, even though he's made the same run twice now. And Adam Webster makes the same mistake he made on the first goal. He gets drawn into the ball, drawn into the players in front of him, and forgets to pick out James Rodriguez behind him, or even call Solly March in to help. And as we said before, they're conceding a lot of goals from crosses and corners. So if we look at this open play cross against Tottenham, it's Gareth Bale's header that wins the game. Sergio Reguilon is on the ball out wide here, crosses in on his right foot. He's got Pascal Gross jockeying with him, trying to defend the ball. And if you watch Gross when the cross is played, he doesn't really make much of an effort to tackle or block the ball. He kind of lazily sticks a foot out, doesn't really put any effort into blocking it. Much like we saw from the James Rodriguez goals, no one's really making an effort to pressure the person crossing the ball in. And again, we can see Veltman, Adam Webster in the middle there, trying to pick up Gareth Bale, number 9, around the penalty spot. If you watch his run, again, Webster gets drawn into the ball. Veltman doesn't really spot Bale either because he's got Kane behind him, and it's an easy goal for Tottenham to score. So again, watch Pascal Gross from the ball here, kind of jogs towards Reguilon, doesn't make a challenge. Nobody's on Gareth Bale at this point because Webster's stepped forward, and it's an easy header for Gareth Bale at this point. A really, really simple goal for Tottenham to score. And a final example of another goal Brighton have conceded from across this season is Thomas Souček's header to equalise the game against West Ham. You can see from this clip, Brighton set up zonally to defend the corner. They've got 3 players on the centre spot, 5 players on the edge of the 6-yard box, and then 1 further player just defending the front post. Thomas Souček is just about 16 yards from goal towards the top part of the penalty box. You can see him there, number 28. And if you watch his run, he wanders in front of Ben White, in front of Dan Burn and behind Lewis Dunk. And Dunk misses the header, which allows Souček to pick it up and score. But Dan Burn doesn't react to this at all. He doesn't spot Souček come in. It's just, again, a lack of defensive awareness from Brighton to not pick up the runner coming in. And I know they're defending zonally, but no one really takes responsibility of either marking Souček as he comes in or heading the ball away, because Dunk misses the ball. And effectively this is what gives Souček a goal. But again, you watch him here, he walks in front of White, behind Dunk and between Burn there, heads the ball in, and Dan Burn's absolutely nowhere near it at all, despite being the tallest player on the pitch at 6'7". And again, it just shows a lack of defensive awareness and communication from Brighton, and they really aren't picking runners up at all or challenging for headers at all. And this is why so many goals this season have been uncontested by Brighton players. They just don't seem aware when crosses come in where the opposition players are. Everybody gets caught ball watching and nobody defends the danger man coming in. So that's a few examples of weak points in Brighton's defensive play this season, and may explain why they are conceding far more goals than their XG against would indicate. They don't seem to be pressuring the ball or picking up open opposition players when defending set pieces and crosses. And if they can tighten this up at the back and really, I think, move a little bit more to man marking rather than completely zonally on set pieces, they should see a reduction in the goals they concede. And I think the change in goalkeeper to Robert Sanchez will really affect this as well. I then wanted to look at why Brighton appear to be underperforming in terms of their attacking output this season. And if we look at the underlying numbers for Brighton this season, as we saw earlier, they rank 11th in terms of non-penalty expected goals. So that would imply that from open play they should have scored the 11th most amount of goals, but they actually sit 14th in this metric. And if we break that down further, they get a good amount of shots off per game, the 7th most amount of shots in the league, but they have the lowest shots on target percentage, which does show a level of poor finishing and shooting throughout the squad this season. Again, we break that down one step further. Their goals per shot and goals per shot on target numbers are extremely low in comparison to their expected goals numbers. As we can see from the stat on the right, they've actually scored 4 less goals than they should have this season based on the quality of chances they've had. And that poses the question of who is the problem in the Brighton side. You know, which players are taking too many shots of poor quality, or which players don't have the finishing ability required to convert these high quality chances that Brighton seem to be creating. And if we look at a breakdown of Brighton's shooting this season, we can see that Neil Maupay, Leandro Trossard, Aaron Connolly and Danny Welbeck make up the bulk of Brighton's shots, which you would expect from them being the 4 players that tend to occupy Brighton's 3 forward positions, that normally being 1 striker and 2 supporting players, or 2 strikers and 1 attacking midfielder in behind. In terms of which of those players should be taking more shots, we can see on the right hand side under the non-penalty expected goals per shot tab that Neil Maupay, Aaron Connolly and Danny Welbeck tend to get in the best positions to score. So the values of 0.18, 0.15 and 0.14 would show that for every shot they're taking, they're in the best quality positions on average in comparison to the rest of the squad. And again, if we look at the goals per shot on target value of these players, Connolly and Welbeck rank the highest in this statistic, which would imply that really these two should be getting more shots in a game, as they seem to hit more shots on target than any other players in the squad, and this again would logically result in more goals. I think a problem player out of that would be Leandro Trossard, who's taken the second most amount of shots, but of those 4 players taking the most, has the worst conversion rate in terms of goals per shot on target and goals per shot. He's actually a really good creative player in terms of his goal creating actions per game and assist creating actions per game, and actually I think he'd be better suited to, instead of taking shots from an average distance of 18.4 yards, we can see there, so around the edge of the box, he'd be much better suited to then looking for his strikers instead, or driving inside and then looking for the strikers and creating more opportunities and more goals rather than taking a lot of pot shots from distance. And pot shots again seem to be a little bit of a theme with the Brighton squad. You can see with Basuma and Gross, they're taking on average a shot a game from distance that they don't really need to be taking. Despite the fact that Bissouma did score a great goal against Everton, it was a consolation goal, and again on average he won't be scoring screamers every week. So I think if they can reduce the shots taken by players that aren't necessarily converting very well and shift them forward to the likes of Welbeck, Connolly and Mopé, they would score a lot more goals logically. But again, if they can look to just create more chances for those forward players, more quality chances, as they seem to be creating good quality chances anyway, they should see an uptick in goals. And if we compare the shooting numbers of Aaron Connolly, Danny Welbeck and Neal Mopé league-wide with other strikers and players playing in similar positions, in terms of their conversion rate for goals per shot on target, they rank favourably with the likes of Bamford and Rashford, Vardy, Harry Kane and Mohamed Salah, who are obviously scoring goals regularly. And if we look at the non-penalty expected goals per shot column highlighted in blue this time, you can see the players that are taking similar quality shots to Danny Welbeck here. You've got the likes of Bamford and Ollie Watkins here who have scored more goals than Danny Welbeck, but obviously Welbeck's played less minutes, and it would imply that if he's given a longer run in the team and more minutes, he can convert at the same rate as those players. And this is shown further that if you gave Danny Welbeck this season the same number of shots per 90 as Patrick Bamford, you'd actually get a slight uptick in shots on target and actually a slightly higher non-penalty goals per 90. Again, if we look at Danny Welbeck in terms of his passing and creating stats below, he actually matches favourably to Patrick Bamford, which would imply that actually in the lead system, Danny Welbeck most likely would have scored the same amount of goals as Patrick Bamford, if not even more. And that can be shown as well in the top right. We can look at their non-penalty goals minus expected goals. They rank the same. And in terms of their non-penalty expected goals per shot, they are fairly similar as well, which means they're getting the same quality chances and are converting at the same rate. So again, if Danny Welbeck can get more minutes in the team and get more shots per game, we could have seen him scoring 10 goals like Patrick Bamford has this season. And so again, a question I posed with the goalkeeper situation is the same that I posed with the forward line. Do they need to look for a replacement in the forward position, or do they need to change their current playing style to suit the likes of Welbeck, Connolly and Mopé? And even though Welbeck and Connolly especially seem to demonstrate a fairly decent level of shooting in terms of goals per shot on target, if Brighton didn't want to change their style and play exactly how they're going to play now, hypothetically, then you would need to put in a striker with a better conversion rate, obviously, to score more goals. So if we look at players that are scoring at a better rate across Europe's top 5 leagues this season, I picked out 2 players, Mbala and Zola from Spezia in the Serie A, and Boulaye Dia from Reims in the Ligue 1. Boulaye Dia, a player that's been linked to West Ham and Newcastle recently, and actually looks like he might be on the verge of a £50 million move to West Ham. I think Brighton could definitely compete with that figure and look to sign a player of his quality. If we break down the top part of the screen here, we can see that goals minus penalty kicks are highlighted, so that's non-penalty goals. Zola and Boulaye Dia are looking close to twice the amount of non-penalty goals as Neal Mopé from open play this season. And if we look at their non-penalty expected goals numbers, they look similar to Neal Mopé's. Mopé's non-penalty expected goals per 90 is about 0.35, 0.39 for Nzola and 0.32 for Boulaye Dia. So if we move into the middle part of the screen here as well, we can see that actually Dia and Nzola are scoring more goals than Neal Mopé from less shots per game and less shots on target, which shows that their goals per shot on target and goals per shot rates are much higher. And if we look at their non-penalty expected goals per shot, it shows further that on average they're taking shots from similar positions of quality as Neal Mopé, which would mean that if you were to transplant them in exactly and the numbers play out as they have been this season, that would imply that Nzola and Dia would have scored more goals than Neal Mopé this year. Obviously, the numbers to the right of that are in green compared to Neal Mopé's in red show that they are exceeding their expected goals totals, and arguably you may see a downtick in goals across the season as averages out. But obviously, if you want to score more goals from opportunities you're creating, you need players that are exceeding their XG in order to cover off the fact that Brighton aren't converting their expected goals numbers. And at the bottom, I showed the shot creating action and goal creating actions of these 3 players across 90 minutes. Again, they're fairly similar numbers, which I think would show that if you were to take Neal Mopé out, despite the fact that he is Brighton's highest goal scorer this season, I think if you put in Nzola or Dia, you would see a more efficient player overall scoring goals. And probably see more goals for Brighton, pushing them towards their XG totals this season. I've taken these two screenshots from Transfermarkt just to show a rough value of how they look at the two players. Nzola, he's only been at Spezia since the summer, and I think he joined for less than €1 million. And I think if a Premier League team came in with the right bid, they'd happily take a profit over just I think a 6-month period. If you watch him in game, he's about 6'1". He's absolutely massive. He appears to be massive on pitch. Absolutely deadly in front of goal, and really causes defenders a lot of problems. If you want the more established option, as I said before, I think Boulaye Dia, given that he's played in Liga for a few years now, and the teams that are linked to him, as I said before, Newcastle and West Ham, and a few others have actually been linked to him across the last 6 to 12 months. Again, I think you get a player that's very fast, very strong, he links up very well, and would fit into Graham Potter's side extremely well. So that's kind of my take on why Brighton are underperforming this season when looking at their underlying numbers. Again, a few points to summarise. I think the main things to take out of this are that they have the potential to be one of the best defensive sides in the league. They just aren't fulfilling that. As we said before, 82% of their non-penalty goals just aren't being contested by their own players. They're not getting out to opposition players. They're not putting them under pressure. They're allowing them to take good quality shots on goal. But I think Robert Sanchez has been a positive change. His numbers seem to indicate that he's playing very well in terms of the shots that he's facing, but they do still concede the most difficult shots in the league, which won't help his numbers in terms of save percentages. But actually, in terms of shots he should be saving, he looks fairly good. Again, if they can quell these problems from set pieces and crosses and bring their defensive qualities in line with their XG, they'll see themselves rocket up the table and look much better overall when the season finishes. Again, look at their attack. Welbeck and Connolly actually look fairly decent this season. They're scoring at a really good rate, and if they can create more chances or funnel the chances from midfield forward to them so they can score more goals, again, Brighton will rise up the table rapidly. They've got strikers of fairly good quality, and their non-penalty expected goals numbers, if they can combine those with their goals against numbers, then they'll look much better on the season overall. As we said before, there's a lot of shots being taken from distance, which implies low XG chances, and too many shots taken by the wrong players. And by wrong players, I mean the likes of Bissouma, and even Leandro Trossard, who are just taking chances and not converting them at a very good rate. And again, a suggested improvement would either be to give more shots to those players that do score goals, on a regular basis, or look to recruit a player like Boulaye Dia or Mbala Nzola. Either of which I think would really give Brighton, sort of a new weapon up front that's very capable of scoring goals on a regular basis at the minute, and definitely see them rise up the table. And I think above all else, Brighton should definitely aim to keep Graham Potter in charge. There's a few journalists and a few pundits suggesting that maybe it's time for Potter to move on. I don't agree with this at all. I think the underlying numbers show that functionally his team are very good. Their expected goals against numbers are absolutely outstanding, and with the right personnel and maybe a little bit more defensive organisation and awareness, they could really find themselves higher up the table. And I just think that they're not living up to their expected goals numbers, maybe because of personnel. Maybe they could look for a more positionally aware centre-half. I think Adam Webster gets caught out of position a lot, and being a right-footed centre-half, I think a lot of the time he finds his body position slightly awkward when turning to try and defend. I don't think Solly March helps that either. He doesn't seem to get back enough, playing as that sort of left midfielder nominally, but it is almost a left wing back, because as they play a back three, he needs to get back and cover. I don't think as well Webster sees a lot of help from his central midfielders. We've seen Alzate and Bissouma regularly out of position, and Adam Lallana when defending. They don't seem to track back with enough effort, Brighton. I think they need more of a collective mentality when it comes to defending, rather than relying upon individuals. There's only so much that the likes of Dunk, White and Webster can do on their own, and I think the rest of the team need to come in and help and put the opposition players under pressure. But I think overall Graham Potter's football is fantastic, and again, maybe with a little bit better recruitment and a little bit more time, they may then fulfil those numbers and find themselves further up the table. That's kind of my first ever analytical look at a team in the Premier League. Thank you very much for listening. I know it's a fairly long video, over half an hour, but I really wanted to take a deep dive into Brighton this season, and really just sort of investigate as to why they aren't really fulfilling their expected goals for and against numbers this season, and hopefully this has provided more of an insight.